Hello again. I'm Professor Peter Jonason, your stylist scientist, and I want to talk today about something that's mildly personal to me, but in a professional sense, of course, right? And it's height. Well, being a short man has costs involved, right? And it has costs in the mate selection domain, and it has costs in the workplace. Right? Women, on the other hand, don't really suffer from being tall in the workplace or being short in the workplace, but they do suffer from being tall in the dating space, right? So taller women struggle to find men who are taller than them, therefore hard to find partners. Whereas for short men, we are at a disadvantage both in the workplace because men who are larger are seen as more, for example, uh, 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 likely to be good in CEO roles, for example, or as president. And men who are short are also deemed kind of less desirable in the dating space. And so this gets us to a kind of privilege issue. And so, in the sense that women have a bit of a privilege when it comes to height because they're only suffering one loss, like a domain in one of those, loss in one of those domains, whereas men suffer from both. Now, it's short men and tall women, right? That's the juxtaposition here, right? And so what we want to consider today is what are the things that people can do to maybe adjust, to compensate for their height. And this is big business, right? So let's just not twist it. I mean, it's big business and it's directed almost entirely to men, right? So hugely traumatic things like, leg lengthening surgeries, as you see here, hormonal replacement hormones that are meant to make you grow. Some of these things might even be trivial, like the kind of clothes you might choose to wear, or the maybe even not, I don't say using steroids is trivial, but something that's banal that we all know about. Yeah, even things as silly as shoes. So these shoes of mine that I got from, no surprise, maybe China, from Hong Kong, they are meant to make me taller, right? Why? Because I'm 173 and I'm very aware of the height dimension and its effect on me. And so male animals often try to make themselves seem bigger, for example. So we see in dogs, when little dogs, like Pedro, of course, go to pee, there's research that says they tilt their hips more to pee higher up, right? They're telling other dogs, hey, I'm taller than I actually am. I'm bigger than I actually am. We see this in aggressive displays where the animal gets all the hair, right? This kind of, I'm compensating for my size. I want to seem bigger, okay? We did some research on this. So Dan Talbot at Australian Catholic University, and I'm going to give you some of the details here. He collected data from 328 people. This is a paper that I'm on with him, and we're currently shopping it around to get it published. And we asked people, what are the things that they do to deal with their height, right? And so we asked men and women, we had their actual height, and we also had their height dissatisfaction, right? So some of the things we asked people, this is kind of just a quick made up list, admittedly, things like I avoid situations where my height might be noticeable as a compensatory strategy. I wear shoes that make me appear taller, for example. I slouch or I avoid standing straight to appear shorter, right? I have considered undergoing medical procedures to change my height. I have tried to lose body weight to compensate for my height. And I have tried to gain muscle or enhance my muscle or tone for this, right? And so I don't want to go through all of the data and all the results here, but for example, people who overall felt that they were less satisfied with their height, right? They express what we would call height dissatisfaction, right? Psychologists love to come up with jargon. Height dissatisfaction. The correlation is 0.56 with using all of these kind of tactics together. That's a substantial correlation, right? And it kind of makes logical sense. And the correlation, no surprise, is substantially larger in men than women. So in men, the correlation is 0.7. In women, the correlation is 0.49. Now, if you don't know correlations, correlations can only go up to 1. A large correlation is usually about 0.5. So if you have a 0.7 correlation, that's quite substantial, right? And these two correlations between men and women are different enough that we would say that it's moderated by sex. This is a very male-specific effect. But we also find something akin to this simply with height. Now, the dissatisfaction kind of makes obvious sense, right? But people who are actually shorter report more compensatory behaviors. Now, we'll get to this place later about whether these tactics actually work, but I want to talk about something more general about how we might think about what we do and the compensatory tactics that we engage in. And I think it comes because both men and women want to make adjustments, right? So remember, it's short men, tall women. So what can you do? Well, if you look at the big picture, what it comes a lot down to from what men are doing is they're trying to appear more formidable. So shorter men are trying to appear more formidable. Tall women, because they have to make up for essentially having a male typical quality, tend to make themselves seem more vulnerable, right? And so I'm going to give you two pathways that you, as men and women, that you can become or enhance your formidability on one side for the men and vulnerability for women. And one tactic style would be the psychological, right? So for women, they don't have to be so boss baby, right? Boss babe in their attitude and their behavior, right? So because remember, the habits that you practice become you. So if you're used to being a kind of dominant force in the workplace, ladies, you become that in your interactions with the men you want to date. And a lot of men don't really want to date that. So asking for help, for example, might be useful, right? So if you increase your, let's call it your psychological femininity markers, right? You become more nurturing, kinder, patient, even, I know it's going to make some people mad, quiet, for instance, right? Men, on the other side, might try to increase their competence or their psychological aggression, right? So maybe they become wealthy. We all know these situations where these super tall women and these super short guys are together. And the question is why? Well, he probably has $1 billion. As my friend Paul likes to say, one of the things that I need to do is put another zero at the end of my paycheck to adjust for this kind of situation, right? So conveying competence. Now, it could be genuine competence, but it could also be the faked competence of, for example, narcissism, but it could also be the psychological intimidation of psychopathy, for example. So we have a study we published several years ago that looked at the so-called Napoleon complex, and we found that shorter people, shorter men in particular, are higher on the dark triad, right? Psychopathy, narcissism, and how did we argue this? Instead of arguing it in this pathological way, we argued it that this might be a psychological compensation for being short in men, right? To be more intimidating, to be more formidable, right? But you can also engage in physical ways of dealing with this, or physical ways of increasing your formidability or your vulnerability, right? So physically, men can, for example, broaden their shoulders, right? You can work out more, for example. So get wider, grow your muscles, right? Obviously, you can do crazy procedures and get taller, but to me, this is just drastic, and it might even be an evidence of psychopathology. Women, on the other hand, might, for example, maybe you wear flats, right? I'm not saying you should slouch as we asked in this question, but maybe some women do that. Maybe they try to make themselves seem smaller in photos, for example. And to that smaller point, people aren't going to like this, but not only could you could increase your femininity, but you could also decrease your weight. And so if men tend to be bigger, so if you're smaller, right, you might not be able to be smaller in height, but you could be smaller in weight. And this will also make you less intimidating and therefore potentially more vulnerable. And I know the people who study body image, the body image researchers will hate this idea, but it is a compensatory tactic you can use. Do you have to be Kate Moss skinny? Oh, probably certainly not, right? You can be shapely and all those wonderful things, but reduce your total mass potentially, or be fitter, for example. Now, the real problem is, do these things even work? And this is what we don't have in research. Usually in research, you simply ask people the likelihood of using these things. Okay, people have strategies. Great. But do the strategies work? If I have these shoes on, does it actually compensate for my shortness, leading to simply kind of a mate choice paradigm where am I just as likely to be chosen as a man who's the same height as me without these kind of shoes, right? So we don't know this. And this is what we have to do next. And so this is a little bit of a calling to Dan as well, Dan Talbot. I told him I would do this video. We have to figure out a way to see if these tactics actually work, right? So does increasing femininity or vulnerability in women act as some sort of compensatory, either within person or between person, right? So maybe it doesn't make me be able to compete with a man who's 6'5", but maybe there's a version of me that's, say, fatter or not as wide that is less successful than the version of me that's wide, broader, more muscular, right? And so maybe you can use some computer tricks to make people wider, shorter, all kinds of things. I'm not sure about how we're going to do this in a realistic way, but I think we need to work out whether these tactics actually improve people's success or it just makes us feel better, right? So are these services, like the shoes that I'm wearing and the surgeries that people get and the drugs they might have, are these just placebos that we're using to make ourselves feel like we can do something, right? People often want to feel like they have some control over their destiny. And if you can sell people this magic bullet, right? Oh, if you wear these shoes, you'll be taller. If you put these inserts in your shoes, you'll be taller. The question is, does it work? And that's the scientist question, right? The scientist says, okay, you're selling this product, but does it actually make a difference, right? So that's all I want to talk about today. Sorry for being away so long. This has been a busy summer, and I've been thinking about this video for quite a while. So leave comments, leave questions. Maybe you want to know some more about height and about its role in dating. But for now, ciao.